Hey everybody, Tammy Kiefer here. Thanks so much for joining me on this unit. Today I wanted to talk about conflict and defensive behavior. So conflict and defensive behavior, that's what we're going to talk about today. I think that conflict has typically gotten a pretty bad rap. If you think about conflict in your past relationships, in your family, with friends, with a partner, I bet you probably get that feeling in your stomach, just that knot. And it's probably because you think of people crying or yelling and screaming, calling names, a lot of negativity, emotional, verbal, maybe even physical abuse. And so when you think about conflict, those are the kinds of negative feelings that you think of, and it takes you back to a place where you say, I don't want to deal with that. But could you imagine even having a life without conflict? I mean, do you know anybody that doesn't have conflict in their life ever? Even relationships, I think sometimes you see those people who they just seem like everything's fine and they never fight and everything seems so perfect. Let me tell you a little story about when I was growing up. My parents, I never saw them fight. I never saw them argue. I definitely never saw them call names. I do remember times when there was some tension in the atmosphere. You could just feel it. And then things were just quiet, but they never fought. And so imagine what the shock that I had when I was 17 years old and they told us that they were going to get divorced. And it was like, what the hell? You guys don't even fight. Why? You seem so perfect. There's no conflict. So it just goes to show you that even people who pretend that there's no conflict because they're really good at hiding it or stuffing it, there is conflict because you have to have conflict. I'm here to bend your mind a little bit today and try to shift your thinking to start thinking about conflict as a positive thing. Start thinking of it as a tool. Because when it's managed correctly, it can actually bring people closer. It actually, if you think about it, in any relationship, if you have conflict, you have to become kind of vulnerable. You have to, being defensive, which we're going to talk about, it just promotes that conflict and keeps it rolling. But to allow some vulnerability and then to work through the conflict and feel like you were listened to and heard, to work through that, all of a sudden you feel like, God, there's a different sense of trust in our relationship, and it feels pretty good. So you can't avoid conflict because it's everywhere, but what you can do is learn how to manage conflict. And we're going to do probably another unit on our own defensive behavior, but what I wanted to talk about today is ways that we can try to diffuse defensive behavior in someone else that we're having a conflict with. So I think that, being defensive, throwing the defenses up, I mean, really it's all about your ego. It's really about saying, I'm right, you're wrong, and that makes me feel better about myself. But actually, what does it do? It creates barriers. And ultimately the defenses go up because we don't want to get hurt. Like, no one wants to get hurt. So we get our claws out and we are ready to react. But obviously defensive behavior, it just promotes that conflict. So think about a situation where in your life where being defensive, whether it was you being defensive or someone else being defensive, think about a time when that was not effective. What was that like? What feeling did you get? What did you feel? Hopeless? Did you feel like this is going around in circles? When we throw up our defenses, we're basically shutting down communication. We're fighting because we are defending our point, and ultimately everybody just wants to be heard. So when we're talking and the other person's talking, no one's listening to either person, and then it just escalates from there. So that's one of the reasons why defenses go up. When you don't know how to handle the conflict, or when you don't handle it well, which we've all been in that situation, it just promotes more unresolved feelings. And when you have unresolved feelings, it turns into resentment, and resentment will kill a relationship in a second. So I want to try to help you understand ways to try to diffuse the defensiveness in someone else that you're having a conflict with. In the end, remember, you can only control yourself. We have zero control over other people. So if you're trying to fix them, well, you can keep trying, but you're gonna just keep doing the same thing over and over again. But try to focus on, all I can do is control myself. And here are some ways. We're gonna go over 6 ways of how you can diffuse the defensiveness. So number 1, own your stuff. If you did something wrong, if you did something that led to the conflict, own it. Just own it. Say, yeah, you're right. I did this. I messed up. I made a mistake. Here's what I'm going to learn from it. But own your behavior and accept the responsibility. That's one way defensiveness will go down, just by owning it. Maybe you didn't do something that led to the conflict, but maybe you're doing something that's perpetuating the conflict. So once you're in it, maybe you take part in the yelling, in the escalating, in the throwing words around. Stop yourself and say, look, it's happening right now. I'm in it. I'm doing it. I recognize that I'm part of this conflict and I own it. So think about a time in your life when all you wanted someone to do was own their behavior. Or think about a time when it was really tough for you to own your own behavior. It is hard. It's hard. It's you've got to put the ego somewhere else. You've got to just be able to say, I made a mistake. I'm human. So think about times on both sides where that could be super helpful just to own it. Number 2, close your mouth and open your ears. So listening, just listening. As I was talking about earlier, I think that ultimately we all just want to be heard. If we've got a perspective or an opinion, we just want the other person to hear us, because by hearing us, it means we matter. You mean something to me. I'm willing to listen to, I'm willing to hear you. So yeah, conflict can just keep perpetuating when it's like, here's where I'm coming from. Well, here's where I'm coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. And then it just escalates up from there. So just being able to say, I'm going to put my stuff on the back burner and I'm going to listen to what you're talking about, that can definitely diffuse behavior or defensive behavior really quickly. When you're trying to think about what you're going to say next, you're missing what the other person is saying. And you can miss a huge part of it. Maybe you only hear like the first part of what the person is saying, because then you think, ooh, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this next. And so then you miss the rest of it. And that could have been the most important part of the conversation. It could have been a game changer. So just listening. The next, number 3, which this kind of leads into number 3, is validation. And validation is probably its own unit, maybe even 10 units. Validation is such an important part of conflict resolution. You don't have to, when you validate someone, you don't have to agree with them. You're not saying, oh, I agree with you, because you're in a conflict. Obviously, you don't agree with them because you've got 2 different sides there going on. Validation is being able to put your perspective and your opinion over here and almost exactly repeat what the person is trying to tell you. So an example could be, I hear you that when I don't call you that I'm going to be late, you worry. And when you worry, you get anxiety. And I hear you that you just need me to call if I'm going to be late. Period. That's it. Not, but here's where I'm coming from, because then you just canceled out all of your validation that you just did. But just repeating what the person said. You might have a million excuses why you didn't call. It doesn't matter, because if you go into all your excuses, guess what? The person doesn't feel listened to, and now you've got your escalated conflict again. So just repeating what the person said is just validating. Let's see. So try not to, when you do the validation, try not to say, but here's where I'm coming from. The minute you do it, you're done. The next, number 4, is apologizing. Just saying, I'm sorry. And it has to be genuine. It can't be, you know, those backwards apologies that you get, or sometimes you've said it before where you say, well, I'm sorry that you're really frustrated that I didn't call. And which is usually followed by a but, here's my situation. You know, it doesn't feel like a genuine apology. It feels like, sorry that you're such a mess, but here's what I did that I'm going to justify and why I was right. So genuinely apologizing is, I'm really sorry I didn't call. I know that makes you worry, and I'm really sorry that I just didn't pick up the phone to make the phone call. I mean, even when I'm talking, you can just kind of feel your insides calm down, because it's like, hey, I'm acknowledging that I did something wrong and I'm genuinely sorry. So that's number 4. Number 5 is body language. So you can say 1,000 words with your body language. Think of a situation where the body language was encouraging conflict, where it was encouraging the defensive behavior. What does that look like? To me, you can jot some ideas down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear just what you've experienced as far as just the body language. To me, it is eye rolling, maybe crossing your arms, turning your back to the person. I don't know what else, like just shutting down. I mean, it doesn't even have to be anything physical. It can just be like the blank stare. Just, I'm not involved in this conversation. This conversation's over. Just a blank stare. Think about some things that encourage the defenses to drop, as just the body language. What does that look like? It might be eye contact. It could be just simply nodding your head. It could be, a body language that encourages is that like pierced mouth, like, oh, I'm just ready to strike out. So the opposite of that would be a relaxed mouth. So I don't know, what are your ideas? Let me know in the comments below. What are your ideas of some other just body language that can diffuse the defensive behavior? There's a million of them. I'd love to know what you think. Let's see. The last idea to diffuse the defensive behavior of somebody else is your tone and your presentation of how you speak. If you are rapid talking and it's loud, probably going to encourage some escalation. But if you can calm your tone down, if you can speak in a slow method, it's calming. It's actually, to your ears, it's calming to hear that. Presentation-wise, the words that you use can be really important. So think about joining words. If you've heard of like, use your I statements, and well, here's where I feel, and here's what I think, and when you do this, I feel this way. You've probably already gone over that a million times in your conflict, and because that goes back to the not validating, you might see the conflict escalating from there. So joining words are more, hey, this relationship means a lot to both of us. Let's try to talk differently to each other. We are super important to each other, and we're worth it to try to figure this out. I mean, even just saying those joining words, again, you can feel the defensiveness just start to calm down. So, so there you go. So as a recap, let's recap what we talked about. Conflict can be a good thing. We talked about the defensive behaviors and how they're very destructive and can just perpetuate conflict. And then we talked about 6 ways of diffusing conflict. We talked about number 1, owning your stuff. Number 2, close your mouth and open your eyes. Number 3, validate. Number 4, say I'm sorry. Number 5, using your body language as a tool. And number 6, using your tone and presentation to help diffuse the situation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to know how you've handled defensive behavior in the past. I would love to know when conflict was a healthy and positive thing in your life. If you can think back where you were presented with conflict and maybe the way you handled it, or maybe the way it was role modeled to you, helped you feel even closer and more of a connection with a person. So let me know in the comments below. And again, thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you in the next unit. Thanks. Bye-bye.